If you are just joining us and just tuning in, you are listening to The Zone. My name is Anna Miti, and I officially welcome you to the program, The Big Question. And remember, this is a program where you can also get to give us your views and your comments regarding the topic that we will be discussing. And as I mentioned earlier today, that we're talking about democracy and development. And I do have with me in the studio a special guest who will be helping us to tackle this particular topic. But just to remind you that you can give us your views and comments on the topic on 0719 498651, 0719 498651. It is our WhatsApp platform. We are also on Facebook and on Twitter. You can also send your contributions there as well. Now, of course, discussions of late in different platforms have been looking at the issues of democracy, looking at some of those tenets of democracy and development, and how people associate the two, development and democracy. I look at some of the so-called gold standards of democracy, which includes, of course, having periodic elections, but then, of course, looking at things like the differences in geography, difference in economies, and differences in other aspects. When you look at Africa and especially the Western world, there has been talk about how do we merge the two, the Western ideologies, the African ideologies, and also the different aspects that we have, cultural, economic, and otherwise, and how this actually affects democracy and development in Africa. So with me in the studio, very distinguished guest. He's been all over the world, having been traveling in more than 101 countries, where he gets to talk about this issue and others. His name is Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, who's written over 150 books that looks at the social sciences, the humanities, the natural sciences, and the formal sciences in relation to the mind, the social, the society, nature, and culture. And he also looks at his visions of what the future of humanity is like. He has written many books. As I mentioned, 150. He also has come up with more than 116 theories or visions that look at the humanities and the human future. And we are privileged to have him in the studio this evening. Just to say a very warm welcome to the program, Professor Baofu.
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
All right, and also welcome to Zimbabwe.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so just to get the ball rolling, tell us in your own words, if somebody was to say, give us a background of Professor Baofu, what would you say?
Well, I'm a very complicated, unusual person because I have written more than 150 books in many topics in relation to the natural sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, and the formal sciences in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture, which means that I have written in all topics, no matter what they are, and I have proposed more than 116 visions and theories of the future. Now you may wonder why I'm here in Zimbabwe, because I'm on a global tour and I have been about 100 countries right now. And the reason I do that is because I want to understand humanity on the ground, not just by reading a book in the library or watching a film or something like that.
So you have been around in many countries. In your view, when you hear people talking about democracy and development in currently as we stand, and people say that there's no democracy in Africa, or their vision of what democracy should look like, in your view, what is on the ground at the moment in terms of democracy and development?
I just want to make a few clarifications first in that question, because it has some certain assumptions which can be quite questionable and misleading. And number one is that democracy is a question about politics.
Yes.
Development is a question about economics. So you do not confuse politics and economics. Are they related? Of course they are.
Yes.
They are related, but you should not confuse between the two. That is the first qualification. Qualification number one is that many of the discussions about democracy and development have been quite Western-centric. For example, in terms of development, people often use Western standards. There's a modernization nowadays. You have to be modernized. In many cases, that means you have to be like the Western world. And in many other cases too, in case of democracy, when you talk about democratic they often mean the Western standards, which means that you have to be like the liberal democratic institution in America or in Western Europe or something like that. I think that is very misleading, but also very dangerous to have this kind of thinking, because you are imposing values and beliefs on one region of the world on the rest of the world, and that is not going to solve many of the problems that we face nowadays in humanity, because many of those problems are not just international but also local. So you have to understand both of them in order to have a good solution to many of these issues in the longer term. Africa is no exception about that. Mm-hmm. So election, as you just mentioned, is a good example. Just because you have an election doesn't mean that the country is democratic. By the way, Nazi Germany had election too. Doesn't mean that Nazi Germany was democratic. The Soviet Union had election too, regularly. And the turnout rate is like 90-something%. Doesn't mean that the Soviet Union was democratic. Just because you have election doesn't mean anything by itself. In fact, in a lot of so-called liberal democratic society, when they have a lot of all these elections, the voters are very, very upset about the performance and the behaviors of all those politicians. They are so corrupt. They always make promises and promises and promises. In the end, they don't do much of anything, and social problems are accumulating. So again, we need to question all these kind of assumptions and linkages that we talk about almost on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. With the elections, and I like the fact that you're mentioning here that there are these differences, and we like to think of the westernized democracy as the golden standard. So you find that there are these tenets that are put forward in the global system to say elections are observed, and somebody has to declare them free and fair. And mostly it's the AU, the EU, and other entities like that. At the moment, in your view, are those entities doing the correct thing? Are they? Do you think this is the way that they should work, especially in terms of then wanting to endorse elections, as it were?
Yeah, I don't think in the way that you do in terms of the dichotomy between election or non-election. Election is good, non-election is bad. This kind of dichotomy, I don't think in this kind of strict ideology. It's very ideological. I'm much more pragmatic and realistic. I do think that elections have a lot of good things about them, but also a lot of bad things about them. Non-election has a lot of good things about them, but also a lot of bad things about them. It depends on what you like in life, in your society, in your culture, in your identity. For example, just like, do you like apples or do you like bananas? Well, if you like bananas, that means that you may not like apples. But if you like apples, then you may not like bananas. Doesn't mean that bananas are better than apples. I think it depends on you as a person. So in this case, as an analogy, it depends on your culture, your society, your nature, and your mind. In this case, the mindset, where you live. So I think that is very important. If you look into that way, and all of a sudden the so-called golden standard, universal standard, just disappears in thin air, becoming ideology. So it's much better in this case for Africa. It doesn't matter too much whether you have election or non-election. The point is, if you can have good leaders which can help you to fix problem, then the system is very good. It's doing the job. And if they are not doing the job, I don't care if you have an election or not. Look at many of those elections in the Western world now, how disappointing they are.
Yes.
Look at all those leaders, the way that they behave, the way that they govern. In many ways, it's just contrary to many of the wishes that we may have to fix social problems in society. So why do you think you have to copy them in order to fix your own problem? You're creating more problems for yourself.
All right, let's talk about development now. You mentioned in the beginning that development being an economic concept, but a lot of it is westernized at the moment. The way we look at it, we have scholars like Amartya Sen, who then says, let's not look at it strictly from a Western perspective. In your view, what is currently obtaining and how can it be fixed?
I also disagree with the notion developed by Sen. I think that is also not very useful. In fact, in my book, I'm talking about development or actual development. That is the keyword that I propose in my book. I question many of these assumptions about development, and including the notion of development as freedom that you talk about, Sen. I also disagree about that. I think many of these are not just very useful to understand contemporary issues. Many of these issues are just cliches, out of date now, and we are just clinging on that. I think that we have to look more into the question and what I call in my book after development, in the sense that we have to go beyond the concept of development to develop society. Many of the concepts that we are talking about right now, in one way or the other, are Western-centric.
Yes.
And sometimes we don't know how much we are entrapped into this kind of discourse, and in the end, we are not really fixing many of the problems. And that's why in Africa is a good example that we still have so many problems. After all these years of talking about development, and there are so many models about that, and many of them are all messed up. We need to go beyond this kind of understanding of development and balance the so-called golden standard. The golden standard, by the way, in many ways is the death sentence to Africa.
Yes, especially when you then look at issues to do with land,
Yeah.
and the liberalization that you're talking about. We are coming from a perspective where colonization happened in Africa. We
Yes.
cannot, there's no way we can forget about that. But one of the things that, for example, Zimbabwe is facing right now is the issue of sanctions.
Yeah.
And one of the things that are being talked about in trying to get rid of those sanctions from the US is the issue of land and, letting people freely trade in land, and the land that was appropriated during the land reform program to be given back, or some sort of compensation happening there. Your views regarding those things, the African aspect, the issues that we are talking about here in Zimbabwe, for example, the land.
Yeah. Just to make the first qualification, which is very important because I'm an American, I do not want to intervene into the domestic affairs of other countries, because I think that this is one of the things that we have been accused a lot. So I try to stay out of politics in this case, and I'm not going to pinpoint any government, any politicians about you are bad or you are corrupt or you are this and this. I stay out of it. Now, having said that, I just want to answer your question in a scholarly perspective without pinpointing or fingering. I think that in the case of Zimbabwe, also in Southern Africa in this case, one of the most important issues that you need to look into is to ask the question, what exactly is the African identity? In this case, the identity in Zimbabwe, because that is the driving point for you to know what exactly do you want. Let me give you one example. If I want to be a boxer, if this is my passion in life, so if my mother and my father or my friend ask me, okay, what do you want to do in life? I say, oh, I want to be a boxer. Why? Because that is exactly what I want to do, my physiology, my makeup, my psychology. I just want to be like that. Now, if you have that identity, then you develop that identity based on your ambition and the vision to be a great boxer, by analogy. So what exactly is that identity in Africa? Okay. What exactly would define you and say, I am an African, I'm a black, I'm a person in Zimbabwe, and this A, B, C, D, and D is exactly what I want to do, not because I want to copy the Chinese or the European or the American or the Japanese or the Indian, but this is exactly what I want to do as an African in Zimbabwe. Now, once you can define that, whatever it is, now development will be on the basis of that identity as a driving point. Now, unless you answer the question, if you don't have that kind of identity, you will end up borrowing from the so-called golden standard, and you get poorer and poorer and poorer year after year and after year, and the international institution will ask you to do this and this and this, because in many ways it's Western-centric, it's dominated by the West in this case. So I think that for African countries, you need to answer that question. Look at China as a good example. I mentioned this in China too. China is developing a new way to do development, which is not Western-centric. Now China is becoming the dominant superpower, is replacing America in many ways. And that's why Trump is so upset about it. I can understand why he's so upset about it. But the point over here is, think about it. You can learn something from it. It doesn't mean that you are going to behave like Chinese. You will never behave like a Chinese, and they will never behave like an African. You are totally different. But you can learn from each other in that way. They have a Chinese identity. They know what to do for China. And they develop that based on their own culture, society, nature, and the mindset. Now they are developing something which is totally new, which is not Western-centric in that sense. Now, all of a sudden, there are two rivals. They are competing for international domination in a certain sense, the US and China. How about that? The rise of Africa in a major ways will be determined by the kind of driving point. So what is the driving point? That is the beginning of the conversation. That should be based on that sense.
All right, in case you're just tuning in, you are listening to The Big Question, and I do have with me in the studio Professor Dr. Peter Baofu. He's an author, he's an academic, he's written over 150 books, and he also has put forward more than 116 theories and visions that pertain to human future. And we're just looking at the issues of democracy, development, and other things related to to humanity in Africa at the moment, because that's what we are discussing. But he's been in over 100 countries putting forward these visions and these theories. Now, Professor Baofu, you mentioned here China. As you know, scholars that look at modernization, putting forward theories of post-modernization, often give an example of China and how it has not followed the development pattern that has been put forward from the Western perspective. And you mentioned lessons. What do you think are the lessons that Africa, and maybe in particular Zimbabwe, can actually learn from the Chinese way of moving forward and getting to development?
Okay, 2 points very quickly on my side. Point number one is that to learn from others, it doesn't mean that you have to copy them. Even when Africa wants to learn from China, from America, or from anyone else, remember, you cannot just take over the program and try to dress that yourself, because you are not one of them.
Yes.
So that is mean that you are going to commit the same mistake all over again. So to learn from them simply means to learn from something good that you may learn from them, but in the end remember who you are. So that is very important. That means that that's only up to a certain point that you can learn. Beyond that, you have to do your own things. Unless you do your own things, you cannot be the center. Remember, when you learn from others, you are always behind, because you are copying them.
Okay.
You are not advancing yourself. You want to be the center. You want the new guy who is the big guy, the dominant one, then you have to create things yourself. But if you keep copying, then that means that you are always condemned to be behind them. So, but that's not what you want in the end. So point number one. Point number two, you talk about modernization and post-modernization. Now, in my book, The Future of Human Civilization, I propose that we have to go beyond post-modernization too. Post-modernity. I propose what I call in that book, after post-modernity, after post-modernization, and after post-modernism. And what China is doing, and India, by the way, is the next that I talk about in those publications, is that they are questioning some of these fundamental assumptions about development. In this case, let's say that nowadays I propose a new understanding, what I call the post-democracy and post-capitalism. Those are the two visions of the future, such that many of the discussion about democracy that you just mentioned and development that you just mentioned had to be superseded. And I'm predicting that these two foundations, one in economics, the other one in politics, will not last. I mean, democracy and capitalism in this case. It will be replaced by what I call post-democracy and post-capitalism. And there are many different versions of that. And the Chinese example is a good example. They are proposing a new way of doing development, which does not follow the golden standard of the West.
Interesting. So take us through the theories that you're putting forward for post development, for post-modernization that you're mentioning here.
Maybe I can show you some example. Many people try to, in the case of China, they try to develop in a way that they don't depend on the notion of dependency. This is one of the driving ideologies, let's say in the after the Cold War, and nor they depend on the liberal democratic, the capitalistic, the market reform that you have been talking about, for example. They try to stay away from that too. So what they are doing is that they mix between the two, but in the end with Chinese characteristics. For example, the government come in, for example, to help the economy to manage this and this and this. They plan ahead. But in a way, they are not like the communistic economic system, which they also rejected. But on the other hand, they are not like the American capitalistic system, which they also reject too. Yeah. So it's very interesting. They make something, they learn something about, but on the other hand, many of the way that they do is very Chinese. So it's very difficult for you to come in and say, let's copy the Chinese success and Africa will become one too. But you are not going to copy like that, because in many ways that's also very Chinese. Another example, you talk about democracy. Think about this. The Chinese political system does not become liberal democratic. Let's say that you see in America, in the West. Why? It's very Chinese. The Chinese don't think like that. They don't behave like a Western a political agent in the way that, if, let's say, tomorrow if you have a problem, they protest on the street, they have mass demonstration, they have riots and all that. They don't do any of this. The Chinese way of looking into politics is very different. It's very Chinese. People used to think in the West that, oh, that's because the Chinese persecutors are suppressed by the government. No, even the Chinese themselves don't like this kind of behavior. In fact, every time when they see some people rioting, protesting on the street, the Chinese look at these people and say, look at the way that they behave. We don't want to be like that. So don't think that it's just a question that, oh, the government is suppressing things. No, even the Chinese themselves don't like any of this. Their way of thinking in many ways is very Chinese, but we are still learning from them. And that's why the West has a lot to catch up. We judge other people constantly on the Western golden standard. That's why we don't understand them. We still do not understand the Chinese. Now they are becoming more and more the dominant superpower, the new center of power, the new center of science and innovation coming from China now. But we are still behind. We are still thinking of them as like, oh, communistic, they copy, they are nothing and all this kind of talk, undemocratic and all that, dictatorial, a dictator and all that. These kind of ideas are Western propaganda. We don't understand them. They are just an alien race. We were still using all this kind of stereotypes to understand them, and that's why we are so far behind. Now, I talk about in my publication the decline of the West, the decline of America. It's time to catch up, to understand them. They are not what we think they are. So get rid of this kind of golden standard that you are talking about. Modernization, post-modernization, all this, by the way, is also Western-centric.
Yes.
Just in case you do not know. These are Western ideas.
I'm looking at it from a perspective of how would it look like in practical terms in Africa. In a system where people are used to doing trade.
Yeah.
As an example, our currencies are actually based on the US dollar, and but we know that it's not the strongest of the market, but it's just the world systems. The way the world systems are. We farm our cotton, we sell it to America, we get US dollars, we buy things. That's almost like in every other African country. This is what you're looking at. So the post development that you're mentioning here, how would it look like from a perspective of Africa? How would it work?
Okay. Quickly to just make a small clarification. Actual development is not post-development or post-development, because if you do that, then you are committing the same mistake that people did before. So what I'm trying to say is that I want to transcend that altogether. I just want to get away from it. So it's not that I want to have post just to make some revision and then another post just to make another revision. I just want to get away all together from that. It's just a trash. I don't want the trash anymore. It's not that I have some romantic nostalgia just to revise it, like Marxism, people like neo-Marxism or post-Marxism.
I'm not going to ask whether
I go beyond all of that. Neither Marxist, neither communist, nor capitalistic, neither or, nor, not either or. It's that kind of dichotomy is very rigid. In many ways, it's part of the Western thinking for hundreds of years now. Either or.
Yeah, it has to be something.
Yeah, either or. Either you are guilty or you are innocent, you are evil or you are bad, you are God or you are devil. Can you think about this and say, look, I'm not God, I'm not the devil too. I'm not good, but I'm not bad also. Can you think beyond that? So I'm trying to say that that's why I propose another theory, which is called dialectic, existential dialectics, is to transcend this kind of thinking, either or. We need to get out. By the way, what the Chinese way of doing and thinking is very interesting. Their thinking is not like that. In a way, they are transcending it too, but not in the way that I'm proposing. The way that I'm proposing is also transcending the Chinese model too.
Okay.
So I'm proposing something even farther in the future about the humanity and then how things are going to get involved. See, the Chinese, the way they do a thing, if you pay attention to the way they talk, they don't talk like modernity, post-modernity and all that. Their own way of thinking is very different. mixing the Chinese one and some other ones. So I'm proposing that I am seeing as some of the forces emerging nowadays in the world, which is shaping the economic, political, and many other indicators. And that is going to change the world that we are thinking of. In the case of Africa that you just mentioned, as I said before, my problem is not about trade. You can trade as much as you like. But I'm just saying that what are you going to trade with? And what do you export? What do you import? How are you going to produce them? So my problem is not that you should not trade or you should trade or you should stay at home. That's not my point. My point is you want to trade fine, but my question to you is what do you want Zimbabwe to export and what do you want Zimbabwe to import? Now are you going to do the same thing that you have been repeating? The same thing about land, by the way. How do you manage land? Are you going to kick out all the white farmers? Is that a good solution? Or you're going to say that, for example, you should invite them back as the new government have been thinking? My point is not that you have to do any of them. My point is that it's time for you to examine the question of identity. The question of identity here in many ways is based on the culture, society, nature, and the mind, the four categories that I just mentioned. That is a way to answer that question. When you answer that question, you say, okay, for Zimbabwe, I think that we should export A, B, and C, but not C, D, and E, and we should import J, F, and G, but not H, I, and J, whatever that might be. Now, if you mix them up, then you will commit the same mistakes again. But how you will find out what A, B, C, D, E, F, G? That is the question that the people in Zimbabwe have to answer for themselves. And I don't think that you should go to the Western NGOs, the UN, the IMF, the World Bank. Now they have the Chinese Investment Bank. I don't think that you should go to them and ask them what you should do because they will be imposing their views on you again. Yes. It's another form of the post-colonial, however you call it, post-colonial, maybe post-colonial. I don't care how you call it, but the point is that it's time for you to say, what exactly are you?
Interesting. Let me pose the question to our listeners. Maybe they can give us answers. 0719-498651, 0719-498651. That's the number that you can use to get a hold of us on WhatsApp. You can also call me on 498655, 498655 on landline. You can also call us live in studio for your views and comments to that as well. I am joined in the studio by Professor Dr. Peter Baofu. He's just helping us discuss this evening some interesting concepts here regarding democracy and development, and of course things that some of the theories that he's putting forward here, which includes that question, the big question: what are we as Zimbabwe? Where do we want to go, and what is our identity as Zimbabwe? 498655, 498655 is our landline, and alternatively, of course, you can get a hold of us on WhatsApp for your views and comments as well. Let me read one or two messages that are coming here as soon as I can get that working. But even through to my messages coming through here on WhatsApp regarding the topic that we have this evening. Somebody is talking about African incompetence. They're talking about African leaders being the cause of the problems that we have, and that we should stop apologizing for that incompetence. What is your comment to that?
I also heard a lot about this kind of talk. I have been in more than 15 or 16 different African countries now. I was in North Africa, Eastern Africa, Central Africa, Western Africa, and Southern Africa. And I can see some of the problems that this person has written, but I do not put it this way. I saw a lot of incompetence and corruption, but I don't think that is the real causes of the problems. It's very easy to blame the government for any problem that you have. I see a lot of problems which are not necessary because of the government. I think that the government can be part of the problem in Africa, but I think that the problem is also relation to culture, to society, to nature, and the mindset. So it's not just a question of the government. Even if you replace the government, what it's going to do? Let me give you one example. Again, I don't want to intervene into the domestic affairs of Zimbabwe. Now you have the new government. So what?
Interesting.
You see that? Just by changing the government, does that eliminate the problems? Now in America we have Trump. There's the new government. So what? does he fixing many of the problems America is facing? A lot of people are still very angry, even angrier. So you see that just by blaming the government by itself is not the problem. It's not a solution. So I think that it is time to go beyond that kind of blaming. Think about this. Before that, during the colonial era, they blamed the Europeans and the white for the problems in Africa. But now they left because of post-colonial legacy. Now they blame on the government. Now, interestingly, they blame the Chinese for the problem in Africa. So I'm thinking that the blaming game is good. But the same logic, I talk about post-democracy. Women too, the feminists, they blame women problem on men all the time. They demonize men. Men is always the jerk, the bad guy, and the women is always the good guy. I mean, look, they are so good to hear all these stories. Fine, all these stories are wonderful stories, make you feel good. But at the end of the day, look at your problems. So I'm saying that in America, you see also a lot of African Americans, they blame the problems of slavery happening 100 years ago and on white racism. Well, in a way, there is white racism, but I think that if you keep blaming too much, you forget many of the problems that you have yourself too. So I'm saying it's time again to transcend that, to go beyond that. Just I'm saying go beyond development and post-development, however you call that, post-development. The same thing too. It's time to go beyond this kind of blaming. I saw a lot of problems, but do not think that the government is the problem itself and also the solution. No, it's just a very simplistic way of understanding Africa.
You talk about the issues of evolution,
yes,
and how we are going to move from the way we are as people. It is going to be different. Tell us a little bit about that aspect, the theories you put forward.
Yeah. It's interesting for you to say that, because I read some reports recently, and because I have written some books about that, and I was talking about the rise of China as the dominant power more than 25 years ago when I was at MIT at that time. I was writing my doctoral dissertation in 1995, and at that time I predicted that China will be the dominant superpower, will be the center of the global shape of power will be in the Far East, and next, by the way, is also India. Now, this is also very important too, because now you can see that all this talk about the problem that you said about Africa. I did say, by the way, that you will see that there will be the rise of Africa too, but this time it's linked with the rise of China. Why? Because think about it, China has invested about $1 trillion and more in the next few decades in Africa. Doing what? Building a lot of infrastructure, soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure, I mean roads, bridges, clinics, stadiums, schools, and all the healthcare and all that. No other power in the last 500 years, or even in the last 5,000 years, have ever done to Africa what China has done in the good sense. So think about it. And I made a prediction that we see the rise of Africa too, and also things will get better, but this time because of the link with the rise of China. China now is investing so much to develop Africa. In many ways, many of the projects are either because of foreign aid or by loans. You borrow money. But think about this. In many of those cases, did Africa pay back? No. Zimbabwe is a good example under Mugabe. Mugabe came to Africa a lot during his presidency. And each time he always asked China to cancel the debt. So you borrow money, but in the end you did not pay for it. So either you borrow, you talk about debt accumulation, but in the end, look at all the things that they have done for you. Think about this. So I think that don't be so pessimistic yet. I do think that the way of international development is changing. The golden standard is declining. Now you have a new kind of development coming up, but not in the old way, but in a different way. And that's why I call post-democracy, post-capitalism slowly emerging in the international arena. It does have a major impact, in this case, on Africa. So on the other hand, the domestic one is the one that I just told you that is something that they can do more too. So things is not so dark as this person may be saying.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure because I'm sure you've heard about it, about how the colonizers have been replaced by China.
Yes,
and how a lot of people want modernization or development to happen through technology transfer and other things more than through loans, which is another way perhaps of it's the debts and the loans are quite a lot. Like you're saying, sometimes you'd have to ask to say, can we please not pay this loan?
Okay. Okay, think about this. My answer to the question is very simple. If you don't like someone, why do you keep doing business with that someone?
You have no choice.
If you have no choice, that means that person is doing something good for you after all.
Okay.
Right. My China to Africa is very simple. If you don't like China because you think that China is the new colonizer, then fine. Invite the German, invite the Japanese, invite the American, invite the British, come and see what they are going to do for you. See if they can even barter to do all the things that China has done for you. Or if you say, I don't want a white man to come back, fine, then do that yourself. Why do you ask someone else to come here and do things for you, and after they finish doing all this for you as a foreign aid and that cancellation, you still complaining that they're not doing enough, but how come you do not do that yourself? By the way, China has 1.4 billion people. There are a lot of poor people in Africa, in China. Do you know that? They are even poorer than in Africa. If you go to Beijing, Shanghai, those are international cities. Yeah, they are wonderful. But if you go to the villages, people don't even have toilets. Now, people don't even have houses. And the houses that they have are not even the house that you see here in Harare. Now think about it. Why come you don't go to China and build houses for them? Now they come here and build all these things for you, and then you say, oh, it's not good enough. Can you cancel that too? I don't want to pay. Can you do this too, more and more? But why do you not do that yourself? Why do you not go to China and do things for them? Instead of they ask you to come in, how come you do not do this yourself? You see that? So my China is very simple. Now colonization, what is the definition of being a colony? Did China enslave you? Did China come in and regime change and control you in the way that the colonial master have done to you? Do you know how many massacres, rapes and all that the colonial master have done to you in Africa? And all this kind of border and regime change and all that, and all the looted, all this wealth and resources all the way from Africa to Europe. It is one of the major reasons that Europe became so powerful, because of all this looting of wealth and power. One of the most famous Harvard professors in development, by the way, he used to be I'll say a professor of mine because I was at MIT and Harvard. And his name is David Landis. He has written a book, not just one book, but on that book he talked about that, and many other people have been saying the same thing too. Talk about the 3 Gs. The European came, they look for 3 Gs. G number 1, gold. That means they do not mean gold. Gold means resources, minerals, and all that, number 1. Number 2, God. That means they want to subjugate you. But the Christian religion say, do not fight back, love your enemy, do not rebel, love your enemy.
And the God.
And number 3 is glory. That's how the European master compete with each other to control Africa. Now think about this. Look at Latin America and also Africa, how much resources the Europeans have looted from Africa in all these 700 years. Did they pay for that? No. China nowadays come to you, they buy all these resources, they ship them back because they pay for it. Next time when you go to the supermarket, you buy a cup of coffee or a cup of rice or whatever that might be. Should you bring back what you buy? You pay for it. Of course you're going to take that to your house so you can cook. Well, they pay for it. Why they should not bring back what they have? Now, and also they lend you money, and you do not pay back. Now you say, well, cancel war. So think about it. They do not control your regime. They do not send the Marines in and occupy it, and military base and control it. So you think about it. So getting a bit too far, I think, this kind of rhetoric.
But yeah, that's cool. But still on the issue of the evolution, that to get everybody understanding, what you mean when you say, all these things, they'll pass, and we come into a future where people will think differently, the world will operate differently, and will have evolved as humanity, not just as Zimbabweans or Africans, but as humanity as a whole. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
One example that I want to give, and that can be very interesting to talk about, is that I see a lot of good things about Africa. I disagree with the idea that Africa is underdeveloped. I disagree with the idea that Africa is very poor. I see a lot of things which make me believe that Africa is very rich in many ways, not just in terms of resources, but in terms of mindset. Let me give you some examples. For example, people in Africa is much more hospitable, much more friendly.
Yes.
For example, than if you go, let's say, to Japan, or if you go to Germany, and if you are black, and you will see how they treat you.
Yes.
There's racism, of course, there is. But if the Japanese and the German come to Harare, how do you treat them? Do you treat them in the same way they treat you in Japan or Germany? You see that? Now there is a question of hospitality and humanity that other people may not even have. Now there is a question of civilization too, by the way. You see, the way we define civilization in the West, we define the definition, we give the definition of civilization in such a way that we make everyone look bad. And the West is always the golden standard again. See? But the problem here is that if you look on the other side, things is not necessarily like that. Spirituality, by the way, in many ways, is also a fundamental indicator of development, if you think about it. So in that way, think about this too, is that the way of life in Africa is very stress-free. The way of life in America, by contrast, is very stressful. Why do you think people take all these drugs? How come you see such a huge market, a drug trafficking, let's say, in America? And so many people consume drugs. Why? If it's such a wonderful society and that you are thinking about why people consume so many drugs, it's very stressful in many ways. And many of them drink a lot too. So why? Think about this. And in Africa, it's very stress-free. And that's why here, people laugh a lot. I mean, the way that people behave is very stress-free. But now, the trade-off for that is that when you are so stress-free and so laid back, they mean that you don't do too much. We have this way of life, again, apples and oranges. You want to work a lot, achieve a lot, you get a lot, but you are very stressful. On the other hand, when you are very laid back, you are happy-go-lucky, fine. But in the end, you may not have much, so I don't think that either one is good or bad. It's good and bad. But which one do you choose? It's you. You have to decide what do you want. That's why my question to you again. What do you want?
Professor, we are going to achieve world peace. Today on the news that Trump had said that you know what, Iraq was better off when Saddam was there, and is now saying I think Libya could have been better off when Muammar Gaddafi was there because people lived better. They all these things, but we've often been told that because of all these things that happen, the differences in ideologies, we're actually heading for a showdown where terrorism increases. We might actually have an apocalypse or something of that sort. But in your view and the theories that you put forward, are we ever going to have world peace? Are these things going to end? The terrorism, everything else?
Yes and no. If you ask me in the longer term, will there be world peace? I do think that there will be world peace, but also world war too. I think there is a question of either or again that you are thinking. Either we have peace or you have war. Either we have paradise or we are going to have hell. I think that we are not going to have paradise, we are not going to have hell, but we have in between, which means that we are hellish, but on the other hand we are also peaceful. But we are in between. So will there be war even after 1,000 years from now? My answer is yes, there will be war. There will be war, but there will also be peace. Now, talk about Trump. Well, I'm not that kind of person who is very interested in the rhetoric of Trump, because I think the more you pay attention to him, the more he's manipulating you. Yeah. So instead of wasting my time and my energy to comment about his rhetoric, I think it's not worth my time and my energy to comment on this kind of nonsensical comment. But I'm more interested in his actions, but not in his rhetoric. So if you look into the actions, then we have a lot to talk about. One example is that I do think that America is retreating under Trump. Now, I don't care about his rhetoric. I'm not going to comment on his rhetoric. I only look into his action. Okay, you look into his action again. I don't care about what he said about Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi that you just said. That is not worth my time and my energy to talk about. Now he's trying to withdraw from Syria, for example. Number one, he's withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. Number two, he's also withdrawing from the Pacific Partnership, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now that's number three. He's trying to revise some of the trading regime with China. That's another one, because China now is the largest trading partner in the world, not America anymore. So China now is also the global driving force of economic growth internationally, not America anymore. So when you are withdrawing from that, you are trying to reduce that in terms of protectionism, you are retreating. See, what is interesting about Trump, again, not his rhetoric, but his action, is that Trump really doesn't care whether you are a friend or an enemy. He doesn't think like that. He only think about what you do, what you benefit me, or whether you hurt me. If you hurt me, I do something bad. You benefit me, I do something bad. I don't care if you are Japan or France, Germany, China, Russia. In the case of Trump, he doesn't look into this kind of black or white that you may be thinking about. In a way, his thinking is much more liberated, but it's also trapped into this kind of ideology of white nationalism that he's appealing to. So that is the one of the features that I would like to talk about in response to your comment, not about his rhetoric, but about his action. That is a symptom, by the way, of the decline of the U.S. as a global power. The U.S. is retreating slowly, piece by piece, but you will see it more and more in the next few years. Putin is right, by the way. I disagree with Putin all the time, the Russian leader.
Yes.
He said the other day that, see, the U.S. is retreating. But I think that he is a good point about that, even though I disagree with many things that he did. But that comment is, I think, is exactly what I've been saying, the decline of America. And that Trump is part of that problem.
All right. Now, you've been in over 100 countries, and we're glad to have you here in Zimbabwe. What would you say to the Zimbabweans who are listening right now, the message that you want to leave them with this evening?
Again, I don't want to intervene into the domestic affairs of other countries, but I just want to say something more scholastic, more scholarly, as a professor, not as a politician.
Yes.
I do think that it's also time for people in Zimbabwe to find out what I just said before. What exactly is your identity on many issues? Not so much on the basis of what you should learn from the golden standard, or every time when you do something you always go to the golden standard, go to other powers and ask them, okay, what do you think we should do? You go to the NGO, the Western NGO, or now you go to China, and some always trying to copy from others. But what exactly do you do? Because the more you copy from others, the more you will not be able to develop yourself fully. So it's time for you to ask the question. If you answer them, I think that's the big beginning for Africa, but I do think that they will eventually answer the question. All right,
Professor Dr. Peter Baofu is an author, a scholar, and many, many things. And he was here to answer the big question that we had for you this evening. Do stand by for the news bulletin at 8 coming up next.